So, New Mexico has legal herb, but the feds, customs, and border patrol keep seizing their product even though it's completely legal over there. And now the weed companies are fighting back and suing the feds.
A growing concern for New Mexico cannabis industry after 2 years of recreational being legal in the state. Business owner says their product is being seized at Customs and Border Patrol checkpoints. Now, a particularly difficult issue that seems to continue as the drug is still illegal under federal law. Despite the controlled substance being legal here in New Mexico, it's still illegal on a federal level. That means whenever licensed businesses get stopped at border checkpoints, federal agents are required to confiscate THC products. This is a huge blow to business owners who are transporting their merchandise across the state, losing out in product and revenue. One owner of the cannabis company who has establishments in New Mexico says he's calling for change due to the clash.
So clearly, this is a bit of a problem. You got legal businesses operating over in New Mexico, but the Customs and Border Patrol is coming in like the mafia and seizing your stuff, even though it's legal in your state. Granted, it's still not federally legal yet. And that right there lies the problem. Now, like I said, a lot of these companies are operating legally, and they're actually suing the federal government for some of these actions. But before we get into that, have a look at what people who are actually affected are saying about this whole thing.
It's almost like we're operating in two separate states, the northern and the southern portion of the state, and everybody up north doesn't have any problems with it. Down here are the only ones that are being affected.
2 years since the legalization of recreational in New Mexico, business owners say they are facing a new concerning challenge, having their products seized at internal Border Patrol checkpoints.
We have people up in Albuquerque that want our products up there, and we can't get it north of that checkpoint. We don't want to risk our employees' futures, and that's a lot of money too.
Jobs at risk and money on the line. Chadwick says he recently had 22 pounds of product seized in February, totaling $139,000 worth of retail revenue loss. That amount more than doubling with other New Mexico businesses combined.
I believe with all the companies in the coalition that we work with, there's over $300,000 worth of product that has been seized up to this point.
With the conflicting laws impacting businesses and customers, Chadwick says he hopes a coalition betters the industry as soon as possible so business can get back to normal.
We're just asking for a sit down to try and work with us and find a solution that allows us to operate efficiently, and maybe it's a way that we declare our product as we're going through the checkpoint, and maybe there's some trainings that we can do that show, if we have these listed drivers, this is what the manifest says, this is how you check for all these products. There's got to be a solution in a way that, both parties win in this.
So as you guys can see, it's a really sticky situation. In New Mexico, there's a Customs and Border checkpoint, and everyone that goes through that checkpoint is liable to be searched by Customs and Border Protection. And what they're doing is applying the federal law, and federal law trumps state law. So in that situation, those products are liable to be seized. And this is obviously causing a problem for a lot of businesses that are operating legally. And there are different solutions that can be had to figure this problem out. Plus, the people who are affected are not just limited to the business owners. Obviously, the people who are actually trying to get the product from the business owners, i.e. the consumers, are also going to be affected. A lot of medical and recreational patients may not be able to get their product. This is definitely an issue that needs to be resolved, and as the guy said in that clip, whether that be training or declaring your stuff at the checkpoint, no matter what it is, there's something, and a lot of people need to come together to figure this one out. Because as of right now, the feds continue to this day to seize all that illegal flower at checkpoints in New Mexico.
2 years into legal recreational being legal in New Mexico, one major problem persists. Pot is still illegal under federal law.
New Mexico businesses say federal agents are seizing their product at checkpoints. News 13's Annalisa Pardo talked to them and Customs and Border Patrol.
Valentine's Day quickly turned to heartache for Top Crop cannabis.
Normally they don't have dogs. Usually it's just are you a U.S. citizen? Yes, and then they wave you through.
When taking 22 pounds of cannabis from its Las Cruces site to one of its Albuquerque stores, they say Customs and Border Patrol detained their driver for nearly 3 hours and seized all their product.
We've been going through that checkpoint for over a year with no questions asked, so obviously we're doing everything compliantly. It was manifested product. So I was shocked, a little blown away and taken back.
Top Crop Cannabis says that the feds told them they would get a letter to get their product back, but that letter never came. $139,000 worth of product was gone. While his business can survive the loss, others can't.
People's lives are at stake here. businesses are at stake here.
It's a growing problem for growers, according to the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. It says in the last 2 weeks, they've seen federal agents stop 12 licensed and legal New Mexico cannabis businesses and seize more than $300,000 worth of product.
It's hurting small businesses. It's hurting all of us because of the loss of tax revenue.
He believes it's targeted.
And it's just clearly outside of the scope of Customs and Border Protection.
But a spokesperson with Customs and Border Protection disputes that. In a statement, the feds say, although legal for medical and/or recreational use in many states, marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law. Therefore, U.S. Border Patrol agents will continue to take appropriate enforcement action against those who are encountered in possession of marijuana anywhere in the United States.
The promise of the cannabis industry for New Mexico was to bring everybody along. It was to create pathways for homegrown businesses to launch and flourish. And this is a slap in the face to all the hard work that our state has done to legalize cannabis the right way.
The chamber says it's calling on the White House to intervene and is working with its congressional leaders to find a solution.
It's one of those weird things where you have something that is legal in a growing number of states, the majority of states, but it's not legal at the federal level. And these are growing pains, but frankly, we have outgrown these growing pains at this point.
A spokesperson with Representative Gabe Vasquez's office says they're looking into the issue and believe the federal government should respect New Mexico law. A spokesperson with Senator Martin Heinrich's office says stopping illicit fentanyl should be the fed's focus, not seizing cannabis being transported in compliance with state law.
And now, according to this article, those companies are suing the feds over those products which were seized. So clearly, this is a problem that's affecting a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of shareholders, growers like you and me, consumers, people who want to get their product, medical patients, the list goes on. And it's definitely something that needs to be looked at. Now, New Mexico is actually doing good things when it comes to legalization and their markets because they've actually made tons of profit. They made over $300 million in their first year of legalization. Have a look.
Recreational marijuana has become big business in New Mexico after just 1 year. The state says there was more than $300 million in adult sales since its legalization last April, and monthly sales have remained consistent. That's helped bring in $27 million in taxes to the general fund, while Albuquerque saw the most sales with $96 million. Smaller communities like Clovis, Farmington, and Ruidoso had more than $7 million each. Towns along the state line also had big numbers, with Sunland Park near El Paso reaching almost $19.5 million.
So they're making tons of money when it comes to legalization, and that's a good thing. A lot of tax dollars are staying in that state, and that's definitely a plus. But according to New Mexico, there are gaps in their laws which need to be addressed, and I'm not so sure whether it's that there are gaps in their laws or they just want some more tax dollars. Check it out.
Good afternoon. Police and regulators want more power over the state's newer cannabis industry, telling state lawmakers today while plenty of people are following the rules, the people who aren't are hard to hold accountable. News 13's Natalie Wattis explains how regulators want to address gaps in the Cannabis Regulation Act.
New Mexico's cannabis market is generating millions in taxes and private revenue.
We had our highest month, I believe it was in August, where we recorded over $44 million in sales.
But state officials worry regulatory gaps in the law that legalize the plant are continuing to cause problems.
There's a lot less enforcement being done on the criminal side, in large part just because there's a lot less statutory authority to do things on the criminal side.
At a legislative meeting Friday, state administrators asking lawmakers to clarify the Cannabis Regulation Act when it comes to who is allowed to seize and destroy illegal cannabis and how.
When we find a facility that has over 30,000 plants and we don't have, number one, the authority to confiscate them, even if we did have the authority to confiscate them, what would we do with it? Right? So there's a lot of stuff we can talk about in regards to that.
State police says they're continuing to find large amounts of cannabis traveling into or through the state on the highways. Around 10,000 pounds since the beginning of 2022. But Chief Wiesler says larger seizures show a discrepancy in the law.
If I have my bag here and I have 8.1 ounces of marijuana in my bag, that's the same penalty as if I have 4,000 pounds of marijuana in my tractor trailer.
As it stands, both are a fourth-degree felony.
Before the Cannabis Regulation Act was enacted, distribution of marijuana was a more serious crime than possession of marijuana. Under the Cannabis Regulation Act, it's the reverse. Possession of more than 8 ounces is a fourth-degree felony. Distribution in any quantity is a misdemeanor.
Criminal justice leaders saying trafficking or distribution of cannabis should also be a felony, and giving it to minors should be a specified crime.
I think we even have less of a penalty for trafficking cannabis to juveniles than we do for providing juveniles with alcohol. So I think we're out of step on that.
Natalie Wattis, KRQE News 13.
RLD is also asking lawmakers to reconsider the process around immediate injunctions against businesses accused of breaking the rules. Regulators say sometimes they're having to wait for weeks for a district court judge to weigh in.
So according to officials in New Mexico, there are gaps in those laws and they're seeking to fill those gaps, and we're going to get into that. But before we do, if you're getting value from this video, please do like, share and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support us further, join the ICANN VIP Bean Club or just buy us a cup of coffee. Now you may have been wondering, does New Mexico actually allow for home grows? And according to this, they actually do, and they allow you to have up to 12 plants at your private residence, but no more than 6 plants can be mature flowering plants. And even if you have multiple adults in your household, you can only have 12 plants. That's the maximum. Now you guys would have heard in that clip the New Mexico officials discussing the gaps in enforcing cannabis laws. Now they're looking to plug those gaps as regulators look to establish a task force to curb any illegal activity. You can call them the plant count police.
That would empower state cannabis regulators to crack down on criminal pot operations in New Mexico is on the table this legislative session, 3 years after recreational sales became legal.
We are doing this for the industry.
The Cannabis Control Division is pushing House Bill 10 that would create a task force of 6 experienced law enforcement officers to put a stop to those defying the Cannabis Regulation Act.
Currently, we only have administrative powers, so we can fine, suspend, revoke licenses. But if we stumble across products or illicit activity, we then are limited in that power.
Currently, the CCD must refer violations of criminal law to local and state law enforcement. The division says that by establishing this task force, they will essentially unburden police.
This would allow us to continue down that path while following due process, going to courts, getting search warrants or injunctions, and then being able to act on those with the orders from those courts.
On Thursday, federal agents raided 2 massive cannabis growing operations in Estancia. The CCD had already revoked their licenses and slapped them with hefty fines, yet they did not have the authority to take further action.
This is a great example of that use of that law enforcement authority that we could use.
The CCD says that by removing the red tape, they could expedite these cases, which would ultimately benefit the local cannabis industry and ensure that consumers have access to safe, federally regulated products.
These illicit, illegal, gray market products, producers, dispensaries, they burden our regulated, good faith, good operators, and it makes them very difficult to operate in a legal space.
This bill would also provide new tools authorizing the CCD to seize and issue administrative holds on cannabis products.
So that task force may be coming soon to New Mexico, and that's something you guys will need to look out for. Now, there are people who argue that instead of being concerned with stuff like that, New Mexico should be concerned with who they're actually granting some of these canna licenses to, because in one situation, they granted a canna license to someone and a company who is under investigation at the federal level. And my mistake, they didn't grant 1 license. In fact, they granted 6 licenses. Check it out.
Ever since New Mexico legalized recreational marijuana, companies have been trying to set up shop here.
And tonight, officials granted 1 cannabis dispensary 6 new licenses, even though the company, its founders, and its affiliates are facing tax liens and an investigation in their own state. Here's John Cardinelli.
That's right. Oregon-based LaModa companies were recently granted licenses to operate dispensaries in these locations throughout New Mexico. This despite their owners and affiliated companies having more than $1 million in tax liens and being linked to a scandal earlier this year that led to the resignation of Oregon's Secretary of State. It has some saying that New Mexico needs to be more thorough in who they give licenses to. To get a license to operate cannabis dispensaries in New Mexico, owners normally have to show they have a clean criminal record and pay some nominal fees.
Compared to other states, it's actually pretty easy to get a license in New Mexico.
Ben Lewinger is the director of the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce.
It's designed really to remove barriers so New Mexico businesses can, get a license and make a go in this industry.
And one of those companies that's been making a go at it is the LaModa Companies, which is Oregon-based and were granted licenses last month to operate dispensaries in Albuquerque, Clovis, Raton, Jal, and Deming.
We're just pausing real quick, guys, to touch on something that I found pretty interesting. This out-of-state company from Oregon is actually buying licenses to sell product in New Mexico, and where they're setting up shop is in these locations up on screen. And I found it pretty interesting that a lot of these locations are actually border state towns. So in other words, people from bordering states can head over to Clovis or Jal or Raton from Texas and other states, and that way they can just get product from people out of state. You can bring in profits from customers out of state. I found that pretty interesting, that an out-of-state company is setting up to cater to out-of-state customers in another state. But let's keep it rolling.
They were also granted a license to turn this building in the North Valley into a cannabis manufacturing facility. According to these documents, one of their owners owes $1.6 million in taxes to the state of Oregon. Several of the LaModa companies also have significant tax liens issued against them. In June, multiple Oregon agencies were subpoenaed by the U.S. Attorney's Office for records about LaModa's two owners and the former Oregon Secretary of State.
I owe the people of Oregon an apology.
This is former Oregon Secretary of State Shemia Fagan in May, conducting a virtual news conference after it was revealed she was paid as a contractor by Verde Holdings, an affiliate of the LaModa companies and its owners, to help obtain cannabis licenses in New Mexico and Oregon.
You see what they say, guys? Always follow the money. Always follow the money. There's always something going on that people don't know about, some money being passed under the table, and that's a big part of legalization. Who's getting paid? Who's getting kickbacks? Where's that money going?
The state had launched an ethics investigation. Fagan denies she broke any laws or ethical rules.
I exercised poor judgment by contracting with a company that is owned by my political donors and is regulated by an agency that was under audit by my audits division.
A day after the news conference, she issued this news release saying, quote, "It is clear that my actions have become a distraction from the important and critical work of the Secretary of State's office." Fagan then resigned from her position as Oregon Secretary of State.
This is a business that's been on our radar now for a couple of months.
Robert Sachs is an attorney for the New Mexico Regulations and Licensing Department. He said his office launched an investigation into LaModa shortly after they had applied for a license.
From our investigation, again, we couldn't find any suspension, any revocation, or any conviction. We are definitely keeping an eye on active litigation, particularly from the state.
He said that the state of New Mexico is monitoring what's going on in Oregon, and that development in Oregon could lead to New Mexico RLD to take a further look at LaModa's license.
While the allegations are severe at this point, we can't take any action until there is some concrete conclusion to those allegations and investigations.
Currently, New Mexico is not running federal criminal background checks on cannabis license applicants.
The state right now is not doing federal background checks on new license applications.
State officials tell Target 7 that they're supposed to be doing federal background checks. However, the FBI is not allowing them to do so. State officials, however, said if they learn that owners of dispensaries have been in trouble in other states, they will investigate. We reached out to LaModa's owners. At first, they said they would do an interview. On the day it was scheduled 3 weeks ago, they told us they had to consult their attorneys before talking to us. We've not heard from them since.
So clearly there's a lot going on in New Mexico, from the feds getting involved and seizing stuff to licenses, going to out-of-state companies that are doing shady stuff. Drop it in the comments and let me know what you guys think about all of that. I'm really interested to find out what you guys think. And something else I want you guys' thoughts on is the war that big alcohol is waging on cannabis, because it's getting pretty ugly. So I want to find out what you guys think. Let me know in that video because it's coming up right now.